What's up? Welcome to This Week in White Supremacy. We are on the road. We are in New York City.
There you go, dropping the 20 again for no reason.
We are at NYU School of Journalism. We are making history today. We are the first people to record in NYU's new podcast studio, and we want the podcast to be so fire and controversial that we're going to be the last. They're going to have to close it down.
It's over.
Yeah.
We can't do better than this.
But we are at NYU because we are here. Well, let's introduce ourselves first. To my, in front of me, not to my right.
It's your girl, still Mashallah Miracle, still trying.
Yes.
Big blessing with a big blessing.
Still welcoming folks to approach her and tell her how much they love This Week in White Supremacy, right? Still welcoming that.
Still welcoming. It's your girl Miracle. What's poppin'?
Doing double duty because Miracle has been filming Brunch with a Black Man. Season 3 is coming soon. And sir,
Supreme Asiatic Intelligently Divine, full-time supervillain, part-time hater, former Queens resident.
okay, all right, man. And unfortunately, Trouble didn't make the trip with us, but it's a small studio. I don't know if Trouble could have really fit in this studio, but you know, Trouble's in our prayers. You know, the chill guy. And why we're here at NYU, our brother, our friend, somebody who's really helped us to launch our podcast. Because when it comes to podcasting, my brother created what is. It's been nominated, right? Podcast of the Year in 2024, the host of Empire City, and our brother and friend, Dr. Chenjerai Kumanyika. What's up, brother?
What's up? My name is Chenjerai Kumanyika. I'm an assistant professor here at NYU Journalism. I'm a long time, I make podcasts, but I'm a long time sort of student. And I consider, co-conspirator with One Hood.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Give it up for One Hood. Everybody.
Yes.
I just got to say, I was an early adopter
Definitely.
when it came to One Hood. You know what I'm saying? I was studying One Hood since probably 2007.
Yes.
And I said, wait a minute. Before people had really started to understand how do we leverage the technology and the internet when we're talking about the fight against mass incarceration, the fight against police brutality and killing. I started watching. I was like, I don't know what I saw. Whatever. I was in grad school, right?
Yes.
I said, I see what everybody's talking about in these journals, but I see what One Hood is doing in the streets.
Yes.
And I focused my whole dissertation on studying One Hood because I said, not just that I want to lift up that work to everybody else, but I'm like, y'all need to be paying attention. I said, media scholars, y'all need to focus over here.
Yes.
And so anyway, I'm a longtime fan. I just want to make sure that's always understood.
I love that. Yeah, that feels good, man. Pause.
Yeah, that's Yes, I appreciate that. And
It's good to hear, man. It's good to have our work appreciated.
100%. And right, so if you're in academia, a lot of times we've had this, where people in academia, if you search One Hood, what you'll find is actually your writing, your dissertation, the work you did on our organization. So we appreciate that. But right now,
yes,
Speaking of academia,
yes, you've been like ground zero in a lot of what's been happening here in New York. I know Columbia has been like the flashpoint. But NYU has been protesting as well. You yourself have protested. As a professor, you yourself have been arrested.
Right.
To me, one of the most powerful episodes of Empire City is you kind of talking about your arrest and your daughter and putting it in the context and history of NYPD. Yesterday, there was a press conference that made national, international news about Columbia being sued for Columbia University's total capitulation to the Trump administration. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened yesterday and what that suit means, and I guess how folks can support that work?
Absolutely. So, one thing I also share with One Hood is I wear a lot of different hats, right?
Yes.
And even within my advocacy, I'm wearing different hats. So it's true that I was a founding member of the faculty and staff for Justice at Palestine here, which was about supporting some of the student protests. Basically just making sure that as students and as just people people's rights weren't being violated because we found that some of the institutions, including the NYPD, deal with people differently, whether you're talking about students or faculty. But I also currently, I'm at-large council member of an organization called the American Association of University Professors. We are a nationwide organization that represents faculty and faculty unions all across the whole country. We have over 500 chapters. And so, at like a lot of universities, most universities you hear of, we have a chapter. And we partner together with the American Federation of Teachers, which is one of the largest unions in the country, to file 2 lawsuits against the Trump administration. And I should say what we talked about yesterday was one lawsuit with AFT, just to get these facts correct. And then there's another lawsuit that we worked with the Knight Foundation on. And I'll talk about each one of those. The one that we talked about yesterday was, you may have heard that the Trump administration is threatening to cut hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding. And so essentially what they're doing is they're basically trying to hold Columbia and universities like it at almost like ransom, saying we're going to hold these funding dollars as ransom unless you crack down on certain kinds of speech, particularly speech that is perceived to be, in support of Palestinian lives, which is then technically they say it's anti-Semitic speech, but because they use a particular definition of anti-Semitism that says anything that's critical of the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. And they then are taking advantage of something called Title VI. That's like this sort of Title VI provision that sort of says universities have to fight discrimination. Now, I want to be really clear and precise. It's important about what we're actually saying here. This lawsuit doesn't argue that there's never been any discrimination, any anti-Semitism anywhere. Anti-Semitism is, and discrimination, racism, sexism, those things exist everywhere. Islamophobia, right. Those things exist everywhere. And it's possible that they were somewhere on Columbia's campus. But what this lawsuit says is that the federal government is required to follow specific procedures to determine that. And they did not do that. We know this Trump administration is out of control. Right. They just say we want to do stuff. And so what we're seeing is them deporting people who are, they're targeting people who are vulnerable, but they're now targeting people who have green cards, who are citizens, based on claims that they have not validated. And so this is one lawsuit that pushes against that. And I can tell you about the other one in a minute.
Okay. I think it's fascinating because we are like in real time watching videos of, like you said, whether it be, people that have green cards or people that have come here to study. We just saw the young woman at Tufts University, the video of her being circulated where, plainclothes officers with masks on. Being arrested. I guess another student, it was like 2 other students since then I've found out have been arrested as well. You're talking about, you're part of this faculty to protect students. Like, is there a conversation on campus about like specifically students who are green card holders, who are maybe from another country or here on visas that have participated in protests? Is it like stay home? Is it like just come, because there was another, I think Colombian student, that was also, she sued, because they had like a warrant out for her arrest.
Yunso Chung was also, sort of detained. And so she sued. I believe this student at Tufts, Romesa Ozturk, she's actually in Louisiana.
Right.
They took her, like you said, these weren't even named people recognizable, identifiable as officers. So, I just want to be clear, because in this role, I wear my AAUP hat. This is an effort to intimidate universities and to try to dictate and control higher education. Really, to what I would argue, this is now Chenjerai's words, not the lawsuit, but I would argue is a white supremacist agenda.
Yes.
But the lawsuit is just simply saying that this is illegal, and there's specific claims and legal grounds on which we're making it. So I think, but it's an effort to try to determine it, because how it functions, regardless of what the intention is, how it functions is that it puts universities in the position to say, if you want to speak about anything to do with the Palestine issue, but also you look at some of the other, if you want to speak about anything to do with race, diversity, all those things, you have to be shook, particularly on campuses where you have all these international folks. And so I will say, in terms of concrete resources, we at the AUP have provided, some linkages to stuff that has to do with like knowing your rights and all those other kinds of things. There's an organization called Sanctuary Campus that has all kinds of great resources, because you got to know your rights, because some of these ICE agents will roll up on you with something that they claim is a warrant that's not even a warrant.
Right.
And they will, but your rights are different depending on whether you're on campus or if in your dorm or if you're at home. And so these are things that we need to be educated about. I will say, sadly, the universities, Columbia, and I will also say both NYU, have not stepped up to really provide enough information. So people on our campuses right now, a lot of people are shook.
Right.
They're not stopping the protests, but they don't know. They're like, if I'm on a visa, can I say this? What can I say?
Right.
What can I teach? Should I come to class? These are questions people have, and the administrations have played it, shaky. And then we see in Columbia, the reason why we found out what Columbia did was because an email was leaked that showed that behind the scenes, while they were telling everybody, oh, calm down, behind the scenes, Columbia actually was in negotiations with the Trump administration to say, yes, we'll do this, which, again, this is not part of the lawsuit, but I feel that's unacceptable.
Right.
This is what's interesting to me is Donald Trump was just in the news, and I don't know to which exactly he was referring to, but he used the words witch hunt, right? And I believe this was in reference to what just happened with SecDev and, the leaked signal chat, right? And what's fascinating is that he used specifically a witch hunt against his administration, which is really what's happening right now, is a political witch hunt against, like Chen just said, like vulnerable people. And you don't have to look far back in the annals of American history to see that this isn't something new for America. They did this to the Japanese in 1942 to 1946, and this is a playbook from Nazi Germany within 1933 to 1945, I believe, when the concentration camps were running. What is terrifying about this, and I have said this many, many times just on this show and then also like on other social media channels, as someone who's a dual citizen, your status is of no consequence to the American government and to this Trump administration right now. They don't care if you're legal. They don't care what your status is. They don't care how you got here. If you say the words, I don't agree with Trump, or simply free Palestine, that is grounds for prosecution, persecution, detainment, incarceration, and possible deportation.
Right.
And for a lot, and like you were just saying, for a lot of these students, for a lot of these professors, if you don't know what you don't know, what you can and can't say in terms of legal status of, like, when these people roll up on you on a campus or where your standing is, it's terrifying. Right? Because you could be snatched out of your house, you could be snatched out of a classroom, you could be just snatched up off the road just for existing, really, and exercising free speech. And I think, like, I share the sentiments of a lot of people where this is something that is fascism, is wholesale fascism.
1,000%.
The violence and the fear that this instills on these already shook, vulnerable immigrant populations is something that, it really is a power move. But I don't know why anybody is surprised, because Trump said he was going to do this from the jump.
Right.
He let you know what time it was before he even got on the ballot. It was like, yo, I'm running on hard immigration laws.
I want to pass it to Miracle. I think the interesting thing about this, though, that's different, that Chenjerai spoke about, is the actual extortion.
Yeah.
We're in Pennsylvania, right? The University of Penn is. The federal government is withholding $1 billion, $1 billion in federal research because.
Say that number again?
$1 billion.
With a B.
Right, because Penn had a trans athlete. So again, this is attacking vulnerable people and basically saying that if you're going to stand with these vulnerable communities, that we're going to take all of your money from you. And what position that puts you in? Miracle?
So to stay on, brand, again, all of these things are happening.
Yes.
Because when we had the opportunity to stick up and fight for people, we did not.
Correct. And who didn't fight?
When Biden had the opportunity to protect trans folks, when the Democrats had the opportunity to stand up for immigrants and Palestinians, we refused to do so. But also, I think it's even more sinister because when I look at the deportations, I see the gang database. When I look at people sitting there saying, oh, you said this word, therefore you are this person, you have this tattoo, therefore you are this person, I look at LAPD gangs. When I see ICE, those are the comparisons that I make. And it's one of these things where because we have not built Black liberation within the United States, this imperial boomerang is now coming back and circling back to the people who are forced to flee here and were not a part of this civil rights infrastructure and thought that if they didn't say these things or didn't move a certain way, they would be okay. Because let's be very clear, the people who are being deported or even renditioned were folks who were not actually out protesting. You know, the girl, she wrote she was a signatory to an op-ed. Right? She was not out here writing certain things out here. She was doing the academic way to protest, which is writing a statement, putting it out there, putting out her, her academic scientific thesis, and still is now in Louisiana after a judge said she's not allowed to leave the state of Massachusetts within 48 hours. They already had her. They keep violating the laws, and no one's going to do anything about it, right? And
it was an African brother, too. I forget his name.
Mahmoud Tall, I believe.
Yeah, Mahmoud Tall.
Yeah.
Mamadou.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think
Mahmoud Khalil, Mamadou Tall.
He tweeted something. I think he might be in Louisiana, too. Go ahead, Miracle.
Same thing. Biden threatened to deport him at first, and now he's trying to sue. And then the courts, technically, when you're going before the courts, you are not supposed to have any adverse government reaction to go against you because you're supposed to have like your day in court. And the court was like, yeah, whatever, surrender to ICE, right? Even though you're trying to go through the necessary process and follow the correct rules and procedures. And I think what we're about to start to see is law is fake, right? Law does not exist. And we are really going to see in real time how many people are actually vulnerable. I think it's even more insidious. I think what this administration is doing is white supremacy because who is the group that they do not want to be Americans? It's Black people. Who is the group that they want to expel? It's Black people. All the arguments you're making against immigrants, all the arguments you're making against Palestinians is the same arguments you can make around Black people. Oh, well, there's too many Black people to kick out of the United States of America. How many immigrants did they say they were going to kick out of the United States of America?
Right.
Oh, Black people built this country. Oh, Palestinians said that was their land and they built it as well. We didn't care when it was them. We're not going to care when it's you. And I do think we have to really be mindful, especially when Stephen Miller is talking about, we can denaturalize folks, that we are still going to be on the chopping block. And I think it's very unfortunate that so many people haven't been doing enough to get this violence to stop. But I do think that watching that video and seeing her being pulled off on the street by men, right? She's a Muslim woman going to iftar and you send masked men to touch her, to arrest her. That's extra foul, extra vile. And I think people are now starting to understand what we've been saying for almost 2 years now, that this is fascism and it's already here.
Yeah. Speaking of that, of fascism and being already here, we're in New York City, and with a lot of the police violence that is happening in New York City, specifically around this issue, a lot of people believe that it's happening because the current mayor, Eric Adams, was under was that you, Bruce?
Yeah, man. I hate that.
Yeah, you do. Was under indictment, right? And then cut a deal with the Trump administration to have that indictment. I guess they put it away or tucked it away or whatever. But that part of that deal was that he would allow the Trump administration and the NYPD to do exactly what they're doing, particularly to green card holders, vulnerable citizens.
He brought back stop and frisk on a federal level.
Right. It is. So what, and again, I know you, going back to Empire City, you kind of ironically, Empire City kind of came out right when Eric Adams was indicted.
Look at God.
Look at God. And you talked about the last. There's a dope episode we talk about the last policeman that became mayor and all the crazy shit that he did. Right. So has there been specific pushback on Eric Adams here in New York? I know the mayoral race. Is he running again or trying to run again? Is he just conceded to go away? And do we think he'll ever be held accountable for not just the crimes that he committed, that he was indicted for, but also his behavior post those crimes?
Yes. There's so much to say. But y'all.
Don't mince words, bro, because I'm not going to. I'm going to tell you that right now.
No, you shouldn't. I think, well, one, as you mentioned out, if there's a lot of historical continuity here, and we explore that in Empire City, the untold origin story of the NYPD, because I think it's important to take a historical perspective, you know what I'm saying, and understand that, like, there's people who are like, oh, the stuff going on with immigration really comes down to the economy. And what those people have to answer is, why then is the rhetoric about immigrants, criminalizing immigrants, the same in 2024 as it was in 2020, as it was in 2016, as it was under, I hate to say it, in certain aspects under Obama, although the rhetoric might have been different, the deportation was correct scale.
Absolutely.
And then, but why was it also the same in 1897? And 1897 part is interesting, because now you're talking about a different group of people that were called immigrants,
right,
who were not yet white. So we should explore those, and the police are always involved in that. Interestingly, when you talk about the NYPD, right, being involved in deportation and criminalizing and surveilling immigrants, you're now talking about a minority NYPD that has more brown folks and more brown faces.
Absolutely.
And an entire leadership apparatus that is mostly brown, except right now the police commissioner is Jessica Tisch, but the police commissioner who stepped down in September was Edward Caban. Before him, I forget the name of the sister.
Because the rank and file is 60-40, right?
Right.
Around there. like
somewhere like that, yeah. And then the before that, the police commissioner, who was also a black woman, was known for turning down more substantiated CCRB cases than any previous commissioner. And she did, and the reason she was forced to resign, it seems like, allegedly, I'm putting all those words out there, but pretty much what happened was she tried to enforce one case where a cop did something illegal, and it pretty much seems like Eric Adams asked her to step down. So what you're talking about is a black former cop mayor presiding over a majority minority police force, and they are enacting this. And as you said, I mean, what's so fascinating about this is that when Eric Adams came into power, when he was campaigning, he campaigned as a police reformer. Right? He was like, I'm somebody who understands what it means to be here.
A Trojan horse of sorts.
Exactly. I mean, some people have said that the reason why the Democratic establishment loved Eric Adams was because he had that kind of credibility as somebody who had worn the uniform but who had been a critical voice. They were kind of saying he's somebody that allowed them to distance themselves from Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And say, well, no, here's the way that we want to engage.
Right.
And they were hyped about him. Democrats were hyped about him at first. Now everybody wants to act like, oh, no, before they were talking about he might be president.
Right.
So it's been amazing to see someone who came in claiming he was going to be a reformer to completely, I mean, backing the worst egregious, out of control force. And so, yes, the NYPD, even before we got this particular expression of fascist, a white supremacist oppression in terms of immigration, the NYPD was already way out of control, right? We're talking about an organization that in the space of months, we got like 2 police commissioners stepping down, all these scandals. You can't even keep track of the scandals, right? Again, I mean, now in Pittsburgh, I'm sure y'all might be able to compete with us. But then, yeah. And so I think to your point, Jasiri, I mean, you saw this video that came out. Maybe, I don't know if y'all already discussed it, but you literally got Tom Homan, the head of deportation, basically saying in order for Eric Adams to
keep your promises.
In order for like us to fulfill our promise to drop your charges, which is crazy, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're just going to drop charges?
Quid pro quo, man.
You know what I mean?
Not like just said laws are make believe. All this shit is arbitrary, man.
He's straight out talking about it. Like we got what kind of governance is this? Mind you, this is all being driven by Republicans who I thought they were like the states' right people, the hands-off people.
Law and order.
And you literally are controlling a mayor saying he can't dictate what happens in his own city. So I do think that the degree to which they're running rampant, I mean, they probably would have done it anyway, but the degree to which they're running rampant, because there's no sense that there's anybody who's going to who's going to stop it, hold you accountable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but states' rights has always been about incarcerating black people.
There you go.
And I think that that's something that people forget about. We had states' rights because they said we don't want
state rights to what?
to have free black people in our state. We don't want black people getting the GI Bill. We don't want black people to be able to own homes. We need states' rights so we can each, as a state, surveil and criminalize black folks. And so I also think Eric Adams illuminates this idea that white supremacy will uplift people of color if they're willing to do white supremacy's bidding. Because like Farouk said, Eric Adams brought back stop and frisk. He literally could have implemented a diversion program.
Yeah.
He literally could have said, I am going to do a robust after school program. I'm going to do a job training program for every black man or for every person in between, the active shooters 16 to 24 list. I'm going to make sure you have a job, a mentor, a program within my governmental department or agencies, or you can't get city funding unless you are working with these youth. Instead, what did he do? He defunded all the services. He closed down, the weekend libraries, and he just militarized more his police force. And I do think that we can't talk about why the Democrats picked him. The Democrats picked him, yes, because they could move away from defund the police, but because they love the police, right?
Absolutely.
What did Biden say with the COVID-19 dollars? Like, listen, hire more police and build more prisons. You got extra COVID-19 dollars. That is what you need to do. And we are also in this moment in time understanding the reason Colombia capitulated to Trump is because Colombia wanted to capitulate to Trump. They do not want brown folks on their campus.
Right. And they don't want to be the face of they became the face of the protest, the school they don't want to be that.
Yeah,
I mean, it was in a free speech zone. The first encampment was on campus in the free speech zone. It's this idea that
to have a free speech zone itself is crazy.
But then to have a free speech zone and then
put jails there
and then arrest the people that are there.
If you use your free speech in the zone, this is where you can end up.
We didn't mean that speech.
Yeah,
but I think it's very important that academia picks it and chooses which black person it wants to uplift.
Yes,
and what it will allow you to do, right? There's only so many radical black people that are allowed per department.
That's a fact.
Per university, right? I always think about the research. Like, as a lot of these institutions, you're supposed to research and you're supposed to put out information. The minute you start putting out information that black people need to be liberated or white supremacy exists, that's when you get pushback, right? And so these universities are like, oh, do we want brown people on our campus who are talking about liberation, or do we want brown people on our campus that we can exploit and make them do in our science departments and steal their data and their intellectual property because it's our protection, our IP, and that is the difference. When you're looking at all these people being grabbed up, these people who are in master's programs, PhD programs, doctoral programs, really scientific programs, and because they stepped out of that scientific bubble, that's why they're being. And that is also this rule of conversations. Oh, you got too close? Oh, we're going to kick you out. And I do think that for those of us who come from academia, who understand it's these ivory towers are white supremacist constructs, that we really have to mobilize and fight to protect these students. Because I can tell you, coming from the University of Pittsburgh, who were expelling students, who were stopping the encampments, there were professors in our class who were talking about black people were not smart enough to be in these classes. Like, black people are inherently immoral. Black people are all these type of things. But if I wanted to go and be a professor and be pro-black, I could get fired from the university.
Right.
And so we have to be very honest about why we are in this predicament. And then we have to be, reality also is that there are so many people who are vested in the military industrial complex. Billions and billions and billions of dollars are invested into these universities to create these drones that are killing these kids, to create the technology, the AI that are killing these kids. And when you were out here protesting, you're messing with the bottom line of these universities, who are essentially for-profit corporations, and we are the products. Our intellect are the products that the universities create and make money off of. And when we say, you know what, I don't want to invest in your warfare, they're going to be losing money. And so that is why they're working with also the Trump administration.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it. And I also think that, like, it was just somebody, and I forget where this conversation about, like, America being a melting pot. Because ultimately America wants you to assimilate into this white supremacy mindset and construct, and unless you do that, it doesn't want you. Like, America can't use you as a person of color. And so to me, this is also about, like, the model minorities and who are the good. Like, if you want to come over here and utilize America, you have to bow completely down to this white supremacy construct, and your talent, gifts, and whatever you create has to be used towards that, or else you got to get up out of here. And that's really always been what America's been about.
Absolutely.
And right now it's just been more forceful. I do want to come back to you, Dr. Kumanyika, because we're in the School of Journalism.
Right.
And, you know, I don't know who wants to be a journalism major in 2025.
Right.
Obviously, to be in journalism now takes on a completely different connotation, particularly because really ever since the emergence of Donald Trump really represented a outright attack on journalists, particularly those that speak power to an individual like Donald Trump, to the point where now he's kicking out like the AP. You don't have access. He's denying access. And of course, we saw this whole fiasco fallout of this journalist that they added him to this chat. Like, he didn't add himself. Like, he's added to the chat. He reports on it. Now he's being attacked as being a scumbag. He's this, he's that. So how are you having conversations with students about what is journalism now?
Yeah.
How do they just go and exist? Like, do you just write like a bunch of puff Trump pieces and now you become his favorite person? Do you just like try to get a job at Fox News or Newsmax, or like how is it? And the last thing I'll say is, I remember when journalism was about like being unbiased. It seems that line is completely gone. Like, so what are you saying to students that want to be journalists now? And how are you in NYU School of Journalism looking at this outright attack by the Trump administration on journalists specifically?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. And, you know, I think I should say, just to set the stage a little bit, that, you know, we have a diversity of opinion in our journalism school. And, you know, we have, you know, people do all kinds of different journalisms. And I think there's a very strong tradition here of a lot of journalists who come from traditional journalism, where they don't really take as themselves political positions explicitly, right? And I want to like sort of at least honor that that's where this department and my colleagues are.
Wait, even if people take positions against them? Like, well, clearly, like, here is a president taking a political position against journalism.
Right. Well, you would see, if you look at the journalism that's produced by, you know, this department, I want to really focus on me.
Yes.
But for example, I have colleagues who are directly critiquing, you know, they were critiquing the Biden administration, and they're directly critiquing the Trump administration. So for me, what I want to communicate to students, to be honest, is not necessarily, I want them to be able to benefit from my political analysis, right? And I tell them, like, everybody has to have a political analysis, whether it's implicit or not. And I want to make a political analysis different from opinion, because what a lot of students come into class thinking is there's two categories, fact and opinion, right? And I'm saying, no, you need an analysis to understand how facts are in relation to each other, right? Because sometimes somebody can take a true fact and turn it into a lie. Right, in the way that they kind of like roll those bars out, and that's what you see all around you. A lot of times there is something kernel of truth in there, but then they've spun it around to in some other way. So the case I make to them is, even with all the technology, even in this environment where, everything seems different, we've seen the failure of the legacy, media institutions, I was excited to get top 10 podcasts in the New York Times for 2024. And also the New York Times has failed when it came to covering what's happened in Gaza. And most of the major institutions have. And I'm not going to pull punches on that. So, but even in that environment, what I argue to my students is somebody has to figure out what's true. In fact, figuring out what actually happened and what didn't. When you see an image of something happen on video, AI can create those videos now.
True.
And so I make the case to them that as younger people, y'all have an advantage and a limitation. Your limitation is that it's the fish and water problem. You're so used to this stuff that it's good for you to take. We're going to go through some readings. We're going to go through some history that can help you critically think, right, as you need to do. And then secondly, you also have an advantage, which is that this technology. Y'all grew up on this. You're used to this. You're not, sometimes I get, when I go on, to be honest, when I go on TikTok, I get nervous. I use Instagram a lot, but you know what I mean? And then there's going to be, and then 2 years from now, there's going to be something else coming out, but they're used to this. So I said, so what we need y'all, and also to innovate new ways of connecting with people. I also want to say this, and this is really important, that I tell people, first of all, when you listen to Empire City, you're going to hear two things that people I think sometimes think can't exist in the same place. First, you're going to hear a show which winds up being very critical of the institution of the NYPD and policing broadly. And also, I'm like, Empire City is an objective, empirical history of the police. You know why? Because I spent months in archives. I did interviews. We did all kinds of research. And so our show is based on facts. And if somebody wants to challenge our account, you got to come with some better facts. But that means you're going to have to go up in the Historical Society, wait till you can get in there, pull out a box and dispute it. Because mine is based on facts. And it's an objective history. This is the history. It's not my perspective on the police. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you don't know this fact, you don't know the real history.
Talk heavy.
And that's what it is. And I think that's the truth with a lot of these histories. I say that's the truth when it comes to black histories, queer histories, feminist histories. If you don't know that history, that's fine. You might not know it. Everybody doesn't know everything, but I just want everybody to understand you are the less informed person in the room. So I come out of a tradition, it's funny, I come out of a tradition of journalism that black people always had to be advocate journalists. We could never be neutral.
And I wanted to ask you a question about that. So all three of us, all four of us, I should say, but us three have a very specific intersection of education, entertainment, right, and academia and journalism, right? And I want to ask you, as a professor, someone who's a former rapper, and someone now who has kind of like a crown bestowed upon them for journalism, what do you feel?
I mean, he does have a Peabody Award, so yes.
Yeah, I mean, really, really and truly, yeah. What do you feel was absent from this intersection? Because at one point, rap was, who was it said rappers are CNN?
Chuck D.
Chuck D said rappers are CNN, right? There used to be a time when you could have a legitimate conversation, like a political discourse around this in entertainment, in journalism, in the classroom. And now with this censorship and the fear of speaking up, what do you think is the ubiquitous missing ingredient from all of those things? Because as you just said, it's difficult to kind of cut through and bushwhack between what's misinformation, what's disinformation.
No, that's a great question. I think I learned a lot from, I'm sorry, y'all gonna think this is kind of like I'm cap, but it's straight up truth. I learned so much of this from One Hood, right? Because
say it again.
I learned a lot of it that came from One Hood, because what I learned, I didn't, at the time when I first started studying what One Hood was doing in Pittsburgh, I was not in journalism. I was in critical media studies. It's a different discipline. We kind of look at media text, we look at political economy, how the business is organized. But what I noticed was that all the organizers who I was really respecting, including One Hood, they almost had to be journalists in the sense that they had to be they had to be the best at understanding the incoming news. Just like before this, right up to this moment, I'm watching y'all get up on headlines I don't even know about. They had to understand, be able to how to think about those headlines critically, know what you can say that might come back to bite you later. Like you can't. Some people try to play fast and loose with facts when the mic goes in front of your face, and then that comes back to bite you. So when Jasiri and Paradise and other cats when I was watching how they moved, it was like they made it look easy. Same with you, Farouk. Like, y'all make it look easy, but what I think is just like hip hop, right? And I always say this: one of the things that's similar with hip hop and good journalism is that we put a lot of effort in as hip hop artists, but then you try to make it look easy up front, like you freestyle them. So what I try to tell my students is like, part of it is that ability to, you actually have to be the best journalist. You got to get the best information. If you don't know certain stuff, you better maybe don't go there right now, but then you got to make the bars hit, right? And so like, that's one thing. The other thing I'll say just real quickly is that I think, need more tolerance for disagreement broadly in our culture.
So that brings me to this next question I want to ask you. And this is kind of what Chenjerai was saying and what Miracle was alluding to. But I'm going to ask you the direct question. Is there a space for truth in journalism now? Is it even necessary?
Is there a space for truth? Say more about what you mean. I mean, yes, but say more what you mean.
Okay. People can play fast and loose with facts. You can turn facts into things. You can make anybody believe anything if enough people repeat it.
Yes.
Right? Is journalism now, the present day version of it, is entertainment, clicks, and reshares more important than the content? And does the content actually even matter anymore? Because if I'm guilty of this, right?
Right.
I will go to Miracle gives me a lot of my facts.
Right.
Miracle tells me a lot of what's happening and what I should and shouldn't read. If I'm online and I'm looking through things, if the article too long, I'm swiping
skipping,
up.
right.
Right, and I need that thing that says this is a 2-minute read, this is a 5-minute read, this is a 15-minute read to determine how much time I have to put to this, right? So I need my content to be concentrated truth, because if it's going to take you 8 paragraphs to get me what I can get from Miracle in like 20 seconds, I'm gonna go to the source. So, but that begs the question of what's the efficacy of truth? What's the value of it in this point? Because if most people, your general person, your garden variety consumer of media content is going for how it looks, how it feels, how quickly and digestible it is, what's the value of truth?
You ever hear that quote that says, the lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its facts on?
Super facts, yeah. Now, I'm not saying I participate in the lie, but like, as a consumer, right? And for consumers of this podcast and other programs, this is a question that needs to be asked.
Well, I think actually the truth and journalists committed to the truth is more important than ever.
Right.
But it's because of the thing you're saying is 100% true, which is the business of journalism, the business of news,
just like the music industry,
does not care about truth. They care about clicks. They care about engagement. And what I love about the way you're saying it is we're all complicit. It's easy to talk about other people, but our brains, because you understand, billions of dollars of research into this technology.
We were just talking about algorithms on that.
And so I think but I think that's all the more reason why it's important to slow down.
Yeah.
And be like, and have, understand the facts and understand a process. And that's the case I make to students. Like, this is why journalism is different than media. It's a truth verification process. You got to figure out how to figure out what's true. What if, especially in the AI age, right? Deep fakes, the sound, what you're seeing. How do you go and search down the document where this came from? How do you ask questions about sources? Where did this actually, where did this start from? Right. You know what I mean? Like, you're looking at it in a news venue a lot of times people are seeing like snapshots. They're not even going to the news website.
Right.
You're seeing a snapshot of what allegedly was on a website. So how do you slow all that down and say, wait a minute, what is the source of information that verifies this? There was an interview, and again, I learned that from watching activists and organizers, Chenjerai and other people, how they were moving in the midst of struggle. When time is moving fast, all these things are a factor, but what you don't want, and this is, I think, the biggest thing, what I got, because I saw some people go down, and we've all seen it, is somebody who was talking real slick, and then found out they got the facts wrong, and our opponents use that against you.
Yeah, absolutely.
They point out the fact, and then now the reason why your campaign lost, the reason why your media narrative got derailed was because you got the facts wrong, because you was rushing.
Yeah.
And I never want to be that person.
I know when I was writing for Jurist, we were taught the lead sentence was all the facts you need to know. On Friday, this thing happened by this person. First sentence right out the gate, and everything else was there. And we were required to link to the primary source within the first lead of the sentence. And Jurist is a legal newspaper of the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And I noticed that sometimes when I read articles now, like even if it's like a bill passed to do A, B, and C, you're not even linking to the bill. Right. So you click the link and it's to a previous report that that news source did that links to a previous report that and it becomes this clickbait. And I do think also it is because of the corporate takeover of journalism.
100%.
Right. And I feel like I'm all like the old lady on her soapbox. But we also have to talk about the reason our attention is so messed up is that we have billionaires who are buying all these newsrooms and are saying, I want it to look like this, or I want this many clicks. And so there are good journalists out there. There are people who are creating independent websites because of that. But there is a reason that we're not getting the news.
And the social media platforms, right? I mean, right? Because these social media platforms, most people aren't even going to a news website. Do you know anybody who goes to a news website?
But I think in part,
yeah, I do.
So I think the reason social media, even the reason our org got so big is because of the stories that were not being told. And I think even if you look at Palestine right now, you do not see Palestinian people on CNN, on Fox, on MSNBC. You'll see a friend of a friend. You'll see another person. You do not have a primary source, right? You had, David, I think Lamy in the UK was talking about, well, there are no journalists in Gaza, so we don't know what's going on. And I was like, but there are people who are journalists who are in this area that can tell you and show you what's going on, but you don't want to talk to them. And so I do think a part of it is that we decided that certain people's stories were not worth telling. And then people said, I'm going to tell my own story. And then with hip hop, I think hip hop and rap for some point got to a point where it was like, we have to tell a story, but we also got to make our bosses happy. And so we may dilute the story a little bit, or we may take on somebody else's story. And so it's not necessarily our story, but it's a story out there. And then you have this whole underground movement. And then you have this whole Triller movement. And then you have this whole, Twitch movement that's coming out where people are being able to do direct to cam. And I think that is the issue. It's not necessarily that people are not going to MSNBC, whatever. But if a lie is easily available on the internet and I gotta do a paywall to figure out what the truth is, I don't think it's that the truth doesn't matter. It's that one, the truth isn't easily accessible, and the stories that I care about aren't getting told. And I always think about even now when we're talking about some of the work that we do is around addiction. Older black men are the number one group of people who are dying of overdoses, right? When we think about that, but where are those stories? Right, when we're saying literally a health crisis is happening, but where is that story?
A few years ago in Philly, I remember I was looking at the statistic. They were like more people died of overdose than gun violence. But the gun violence conversation is out there, but not the overdose. To your point,
but I can go online. I get 100 stories of what's going on in rural America. Right. We can get all of those. Where are our stories? And so I think a part of it is that legacy media has failed our communities. 100%. And then we can just tell our story now on social media. And now those apps that we talk about, our truths, are getting taken down because it goes against the grain. But lastly, I will say, I noticed that with AI has been creating the stories and narratives that we've said we're missing for a long time. The things that are popular in AI, it's like the models, right? There's people who are in their 60s and 70s modeling, but we disrespect our own elders and we don't hire our own elders. Right. It's the things that we've been asking for so long that now people are using AI for, and so it's the cycle again. So I do think that journalism has a place. I think of places like Drop Site News, who's coming up. I do think of
BlackPittsburgh.com.
BlackPittsburgh.com in Chicago. I think it was like Thrive in Chicago. I forgot what the black woman who runs that independent magazine. And so I do think that there is a place for journalism, but I do think it is those stories. So when you have I like to call him Terror 47 saying, oh, this is the Gulf of America. Well, how do you say that? Do you say, according to the United States government, this is the Gulf of America? Right. Or do you say the rest of the world says this is the Gulf of Mexico? Those things I think is really important for journalism. When we're looking at particularly scientific studies, this whole conversation around trans identity and gender dysphoria, I think journalism is at its strongest when it's able to do the deep dive in the research and explain these theories. Because when we're losing millions of dollars because our elected officials don't know the difference between transgender and transgenetic, that becomes the issue. So I do think that journalism and truth still has a place in our society, and that we still have to fight for.
But what capitalism does is it makes you, like, again, like, those stories cost money. Those stories cost time. Who's going to pay for it, and what's the return on investment? And so when you put that in regards to truth, it becomes different. I think just to come back to One Hood, for us, One Hood was started because our stories weren't getting told. We weren't being heard. When they were talking about black men, it was crime, it was sports, and that was it. And so for us, it was about creating space for, starting with young black men, but just people of color in general, to be able to tell their own story, to feel like their voices mattered, their voices were heard, and then kind of creating this apparatus where we also could be advocates in terms of, like, what stories are being told, why, what journalists were getting wrong. I tell people all the time, like, there's almost every interview I've ever done have been misquoted. And, you know, I've had, you know, the first time the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did a story on me, the journalist sent it to me, and then when it came out, it was completely edited, totally different. It was a quote that was put in it that I didn't even say. So, again, journalism has always had let's say legacy journalism has always had a particular angle, even when
a loose relationship with truth.
Right. But really, even when they told our story, it was for something specific, right? And so that truth and that real telling of the story becomes necessary. And so we said, okay, we have to create our own apparatus, our own systems, our own institutions if we want our stories to be told, and we want them to be told authentically. And I think that's where we're going right now. The question then for us all the time is, like, how are we able to maintain these institutions, you know what I'm saying? And who maintains them, and how are we maintained? Is it, you know, everybody signs up, and, like, for $5 a month, you have Patreon and folks making content over there. And it's like, okay, we're going to get a bunch of people to continue to support us. How do we make money from this? Is it YouTube views? Is it all of these different things? So I think we can talk about this. Obviously, we've gotten to a much larger subject. However, we do have to wrap it up. Any final words? I mean, you know, it's a lot happening right now. You mentioned another lawsuit. What should we be, speaking of journalism, right? What should our audience be paying attention to, and how can we support, you know, folks that are using liberatory practices in the midst of this Trump administration crackdown?
Absolutely. Well, I think with reference to this crackdown, you know, one thing I think that's really important is coalition building and what I would call power building. And, you know, this is relevant to the media conversation because, you know, there are a lot of people who have kind of come into the game almost thinking of themselves or functioning as media influencers. But the currency and the power when you're an organizer, you know, is different, right? And media influencer loves to point out how someone's a hypocrite. Loves to dunk on somebody. A coalition builder is saying, if I got more people, I can have more leverage. As long as I can get those people to move with respect and to move in everybody's, you know, move in everybody's interests, right? And so I think what we need right now is more people. You know, what I hate to say this, people don't want to hear this. We should always keep marching and keep protesting, but this administration has proven, and the last one, that they can endure that, right? They will keep a genocide going even when we're in the streets. So I'm not saying don't get out the streets, but I'm saying that there's other. When you look at the history of radical protests, labor power, the ability to actually shut things down, different organizations, we have to build coalition right now that can put pressure on the electoral process. And in some ways, what's happened in Pittsburgh, I mean, Pittsburgh, the sort of accomplishments y'all have made, I'm not saying the fight is over, but in terms of influencing government was because of, I think, coalition and real organizing power. And those lessons, I think, are what's important. Now,
a lot of that was actually because of Miracle.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised. But I would say one thing I just do want to say, get in here about these funding cuts is that when they cut things like public health and they're cutting like all this health research, you know, I think the education is getting. We need to educate people about how this impacts our communities. We can do more than one thing at a time. Meaning, NYU, Columbia, University of Pittsburgh, these universities need to be critiqued. We need to critique them and the way they move in our communities, what they do and don't do. But also, I don't want RFK Jr. doing the medical research. I want Columbia doing it. You know what I'm saying? I want the reason why
you don't trust RFK.
The reason why those institutions have that money in the first place is because there was a plan that basically said these universities should be doing, the top elite universities should be doing the best medical research to help get people the stuff we need. And I want people to understand that this black and brown people that hurt and communities across the country, it's sometimes those very university centers that are being cut, that's where people are getting their health care from. Mm-hmm. That's where people are getting their, that Alzheimer's medication for your, that cancer medication for your family member that you hope is around a little bit longer. Like, I don't know if you think RFK is going to give you that, but he's not. And so part of what I think has to happen and where I want people to plug in is to join in coalition, look at the organization groups that you're a part of. AFT is K through 12 teachers. That's teachers, right? So I know we have a complicated relationship to teachers, but now we got to start saying, how can we move in coalition? How can we educate people about what this means for our community? And I think that's part of what happens, because there's a lot of ideas circulating around. I mean, I heard some people saying, well, white folks, they created this situation, let them deal with it. And I'm like, no, we're feeling the pain from this.
Absolutely.
We can't, this ain't about escaping for me, moving to another country. I'm part of I'm out here in the field. We have to actually fight this. Absolutely. And I don't like that we got to fight it, but we do. And so, please, we can make it available where folks can reach out. I want to continue to work with and learn from One Hood, but I think that building power is key. And I think that in that regard, social media and all this other stuff is part of building power, but we need to get in community with people and really talk about what it means to actually exert leverage over this thing.
I agree. Final word, Miracle?
I just want to say thank you, because I think over the past year and a half, your work has just been so valuable to a lot of folks, and just your leadership, especially as we've been organizing. And so I know you don't do it for the accolades, but I just want to say thank you. And the fact that you're not stopping the fight is just admirable. And it gives other people examples of how to fight, how to engage, and how to keep going. Because it's easy to give into fascism. And you're really doing this blueprint of no, you do not have to capitulate. You can fight for your industry and your community and your students. And this is how. So just thank you.
Thank you. And I want, and y'all, and let's stay in accountability and community so I can keep learning from y'all and learn how to do it better.
Same. Farouk?
Yeah, no, it's just always good to see you. It's always good to hear from you.
Definitely.
Love Empire State.
Empire City.
I mean, Empire City. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just looking at the thing.
It's all that. Empire State, Empire City, Empire Country. It's all that.
No, but if you're tuning into this, please make sure run them streams up for both of these shows, because we're doing a lot of things that people need to hear and are afraid to say.
Right. And I would even say, you got a hell of a trilogy. Podcast trilogy,
really,
in my opinion. I would even say, folks, if you like podcasts, I would say go to Seeing White. Where you you were part of that pod. I know you didn't lead that podcast, but part of that podcast. Then go to Uncivil.
Uncivil was crazy.
And then Empire City, the true history. You see that my brother did his research, which also featured, Kamal Ware.
Kamal Ware.
You know what I'm saying? From Pittsburgh. What's my sister?
Mariam Kaba.
Kaba, representing Chicago. You just had a lot of, I was like, oh, I know all these are my friends coming together. So get that trilogy of podcasts, and I'm sure you have something coming up soon. We can't wait. But thank you for taking time today. You have been listening to This Week in White Supremacy. Peace. One Hood.
One Hood.